Welcome. Bruchim habayim vitami. I am Elise Lieberman as the director of the Toby Center here in Warsaw. I am delighted to welcome you all to tonight's amazing session, and with our extending guest speakers, Professor Barbara Kirshenblatt-Gimblett and the museum director, Zygmunt Stępiński. We are indeed a worldwide audience tonight. We span the equator, we are crossing the international dateline, and I want to take a few minutes just to greet several very special guests. Philip Jasinski from the Polish Foreign Ministry, Chief Rabbi Polin Michael Shudrick, Tad Toby, Judd Toby, Sean Toby, and Shana Penn of Toby Philanthropies. We'd like to also welcome, and this is a spoiler, next session speakers, Professor Antoni Polonsky and Professor Marcin Wodzinski. And of course, all of our past and future and tour participants, we really miss you. And we're waiting for the time when we can all greet you here in Poland, take you to POLIN Museum. And we want you to know that we're ready when you are, when the world is ready. And we really encourage you to keep in touch and trying to bring Poland to you. And this is a very special shout out to a very special person to all of us. This is to Sissy Swig on her 90th birthday. Sissy, we're sending you love and wishes for a very healthy and happy year. Bis 120. Welcome. Now, happily tonight, we have 700 people, actually a few more. Some people are just joining us at the last minute, registered for this evening's conversation, and among them, they are friends from our global network. And permit me, but I'd like to recognize you all, friends from the American Jewish Committee, friends from the American Friends of the POLIN Museum, the Association of the Jewish Historical Institute, the Auschwitz Jewish Center, the Center for Jewish History in New York, the Council for American Jewish Museums, the David Berg Foundation, the Dutch Humanitarian Fund, the Evans Foundation, the Fellowship at Auschwitz for the Study of Professional Ethics, the Galicia Museum, the JCC in Warsaw and the JCC in Krakow, the Jewish Food Society, the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center, JFCS Holocaust Center in San Francisco, as well as the Magnus Museum, the Marek Edelman Dialogue Center in Łódź, the Michael Tracin Fund for Poland, the Nash Foundation and the Neubauer Family Foundation, Friends from Park Avenue Synagogue in New York, of course from the POLIN Museum, the Rothschild Foundation Hannah Div Europe, the Sydney Museum, the US Holocaust Memorial Museum, and Yad Vashem. And I also know that there are many friends and colleagues of Barbara and Zygmunt who are here with us, and we welcome you warmly. Just a few words of how this evening's session will proceed. The presentation will last between 40 and 45 minutes, followed by a 15-minute Q&A session. You all will be on mute, but we encourage you to send your questions and comments through the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Unfortunately, we will not be able to answer all of your questions, but our guests, both Barbara and Zygmunt, have agreed to follow up with answers that we were not able to give you tonight in our follow-up newsletter, and we look forward to having you have the chance to read them. And I would also just say from the TGHT team that we're very delighted by some of your questions, because they are actually giving us food for thought for the topics of those issues which people would really like to hear more about in terms of Jewish Poland, past and present. It's now my pleasure to introduce our honored guests. Barbara Kirshenblatt-Gimblett is the University Professor Emerita and Professor Emerita of Performance Studies at New York University, and the Ronald S. Lauder Chief Curator of the Core Exhibition at the POLIN Museum of the History of Polish Jews. Barbara's books include, among many, Destination Culture, Tourism, Museums, and Heritage, Image Before My Eyes, A Photographic History of Jewish Life in Poland, 1864 to 1939 with Lucien Dobroszycki, and They Call Me Mayor July, Painted Memories of Jewish Life in Poland Before the Holocaust with her father, of blessed memory, Mayor Kirshenblatt. Barbara received the Officer's Cross of the Order of Merit of the Republic of Poland and was elected to the American Academy of the Arts and Sciences, and recently received the 2020 Dan David Prize. She currently serves as advisor on many boards of Jewish museums, among them Vienna, Berlin, and Moscow, and advises on museum projects in Lithuania, Albania, Israel, and the United States. Barbara, welcome.
Thank you.
Zygmunt Stępiński graduated from the Department of History at the University of Warsaw, and prior to joining the POLIN Museum as its deputy director in 2012, he was a publisher and journalist and the co-founder of the Curator Publishing Company. During his tenure as deputy director, Mr. Stępiński supervised education and communications, as well as sales and marketing. And Zygmunt, you are credited with overseeing the museum's record-breaking attendance and the success of its well-received temporary exhibitions, as well as the institution's ongoing cultural and educational programs. Zygmunt was appointed the POLIN Museum director in March 2020. Welcome, Zygmunt. The Zoom room is yours.
Thank you very, very much, Helise. I want to thank Helise and her team, the Toby Philanthropies and Toby Jewish Heritage Tours as well, for this webinar series. And Zygmunt and I are both delighted to be able to conduct this particular one. It comes at a very, very important and critical time. POLIN Museum shares a situation with basically museums across the globe, and especially Jewish museums and the smaller ones, which are quite vulnerable. During the pandemic, which nobody expected, there was a very sharp and sudden shutdown with enormous consequences. And I think all of us have been trying to cope with it. There are quite a few museums that are going to close and never reopen, and others that will not survive without a lot of help. And so the real question is a question of resilience. What will it take for museums generally, for Jewish museums specifically, and for those in Europe, because I'm also thinking about Jewish museums elsewhere in the United States, in Australia and Israel, but focusing specifically on Europe, what will it take? What will it take for them to truly be resilient, to be able to weather this storm and to come out on the other side? And the other side will not be a new normal. It will be a new normal. It will not be the normal that we knew from before. So try to even envision what the new normal will be, trying to cope with the present situation and trying to think through where we will go forward. That's really what we want to talk about today, and we want to do so in relation to POLIN Museum specifically, but I hope that perhaps in the Q&A, those of you who are representing other museums and other cultural institutions will share your experiences as well. And so we'll be exploring POLIN Museum specifically, but hopefully the issues that we're facing and some of the solutions that we're finding will really speak to your experience too. So let me begin with 2019. 2019 was a good year. And I thought that what we might do by way of introduction to our webinar is to show a short video. And if you'll just give me a moment, I'm going to share my screen. And I'm going to share my screen. Okay. And what I'd like to do is to show a short video because I have to say that, and it would be very interesting what Zygmunt has to say, that when I looked at this video, which is a sum up of 2019, I asked myself, will we ever be there again? So this is a short video. It's about 3 minutes. Okay, so basically what that video does is to show us the way we were in 2019, and it's very hard to imagine that we will ever be back there, though God willing, I'm hoping that we will, but certainly not in the next 12 months. So what I'd like to do is to ask Zygmunt, from his perspective, what were POLIN Museum's greatest achievements in 2019? You saw some of the highlights in that video, but perhaps you might, signal a couple of the most important ones from your perspective.
Well, I should start singing "Those Were the Days," my friend, because it was a very beautiful year and full of successes. But I will mention a few. First is the core exhibition. As you know, every year we have a very good audience. Last year it was 30,000 people. But our greatest success, it was to reach the completely new group visitors to the core exhibition, families and children. For many years, we were aware that this group is reluctant to visit POLIN, since they consider its subject difficult and not addressed to children. So we create a special audio guide for children, which is full of quizzes and games. And it was a great success. Let me say that one young visitor, after visiting the museum, when the tour was over, started to cry. Because for him, it was something absolutely fantastic. We also had a very good result with the audience on the two temporary exhibitions. First was King's Mat, Poland. It was addressed to the young audience and the family with child. As well, the next one, Gdynia, Tel Aviv, with over 60,000 visitors. So I think that it was, in terms of the whole work which was done by the museum, it was the year of success. But despite this success, it was also a very difficult year for me. As you know, my boss, Professor Stola, won the competition for the position of the director of POLIN Museum, but he was not posted. I had an agreement, a gentleman agreement with him, that I will stay as his deputy till the end of the competition, and we are sure that it will take 2 or 3 months. But as you know, it took 1 year. So after 1 year, when it was absolutely clear that the Minister of Culture will not appoint Professor Stola for the director of the museum, the Association of the Jewish Historical Institute submitted my candidacy for the position of the director of the museum. But despite all this uncertainty, we completed the entire program. Attendance was record-breaking, and also the financial results were excellent. So the year was, in some way, it was a success, but with a very bitter taste.
Well, indeed, it was. And of course, this is the museum during the 3 months that it was locked down, where it was truly completely empty. But in fact, I would say that the museum was very energetic and very creative, working largely from home, or working entirely from home, in really meeting the challenges. So what I'd like to do now, and I'm hoping that this will work without a glitch, is I want to contrast 2019 with 2020. And this is a short 2-minute video, and I have my fingers crossed that this time it will work without a glitch. So our apologies for that. Okay, so here we go. So the difference, of course, is enormous. And there's a huge difference between having our visitors in the museum, lots of them, close to each other, touching screens, interacting, and having to operate at a distance. And so I think the response was really very creative. And I wanted to ask you, Zygmunt, to say something about 220, the first 6 months of 220. I know that no one expected the pandemic. Nobody expected that the entire museum would be locked down and empty and the building closed for 3 months. But how did you respond?
We respond immediately. Even a few days before the closing of the museum, I decided to set up a crisis management team. It was very important because we had to make a lot of very important decisions. The first one was to cut costs. All costs which could be cut were cut. It was a very dramatic moment because we decided that we should focus on the project which are financed with grants only, and especially grants in which we could cover staff salaries. Then we rescheduled our temporary exhibition plan, which was ready 2 or 3 years ago, and everything was precisely planned. We also postponed the development of the core exhibition. And what is most important, we decided to switch to online. And we did it in 2 weeks.
And of the online projects, what would you consider to have been the most successful?
Well, first of all, the whole daffodil action. The program of which commemorate the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, which we organized for 8 years with a very great and media response. And this year we are ready we are ready for the program. And then in 2 weeks, we had to reorganize everything and to switch the program to online.
Well, you know, that program, it turned out, like so many of the other online programs, actually allowed us to reach a much wider audience than we otherwise could. Could you estimate the audience, the outreach of our online program during the pandemic?
Well, we have information from the agencies which analyze the internet market. So it's unbelievable information. Almost 37 million people had a contact with a hashtag remembering the Ghetto Warsaw Uprising. So it was much more than a year before. We also prepared a special online project, including the lecture of Professor Jacek Leociak about the history of Warsaw Ghetto, a special online walk with Barbara Chomantowska, who is a writer, and she specializes in the history of Muranów and its architecture, as well the reading of Hannah Kral book about Marek Edelman, and for example the Jacek Leociak lecture, you can see Professor on the screen, was seen by more than 60,000 people.
Yeah, that's absolutely amazing. And you can see also from the numbers that these are reaching 700-800 people, liking, engaging, commenting. We were able to do an outreach, and the idea is that, you know, ordinarily we would have been on the streets with volunteers interacting personally. In this way, although we didn't have that kind of direct interpersonal contact, we actually activated people to make their own paper daffodils, to wear them, to post them on Facebook, and our outreach was extraordinary. And I'm very much hoping that we're going to be able to continue to really take advantage of what we learned, from that process. We had our ambassadors, both very distinguished, well-known celebrities, but also youth leaders and youth ambassadors. And I think that was a really, really important element. Now, in addition, actually, one thing I wanted to mention was one of the most innovative developments from my point of view, which was Radio Pauline. And I wondered if you say something about that.
Of course, Barbara, the idea of Radio Pauline was born a long time ago. Our technical department came up with it 5 or 6 years ago, but they didn't spoke about it with the director of the museum because because our whole program was so rich that they were afraid that there will be no place for a radio. But they presented the idea to me on the very first day of after the museum was closed, and it truly took me 3 seconds to write the email, let's do it, and they start doing it. And right now, the Pauline Radio is working. Its activity was mentioned by the New York Times, which is absolutely unusual, that the leading world daily newspaper is interested in a small radio in Polin Museum in Poland. But I think that this is the project we would like to develop. First of all, we would like to prepare some content in English, because this is the very simple way to reach the people in the diaspora, English-speaking diaspora. First. Second, we have fantastic materials in our archive. So we can use some lectures, discussion, conferences as well. We have a fantastic music program too. So we'll use it in the next future. Right now we are working on the new tools which will raise the quality of broadcasting. But in my opinion, it was a perfect idea, and we'll continue.
Well, I'll tell you what I love about it. First of all, I think that audio is really, I would say, a wave of the past that has a future. And that people are listening to podcasts and to a lot of audio, particularly if they're, whether they're riding a bicycle, walking, cooking, whatever they might be doing. So it's really a kind of an old format within a new platform. And it lets us really leverage so many of our recorded events, events that took place in the museum that we recorded and have archived, as well as creating completely new content and reaching a very, very wide audience. I think it's absolutely brilliant. And 12 hours of programming already, and within days, this was up and running. I think that is miraculous. And I don't know, maybe other museums have radio stations. I'm not aware of one.
No, we are Barbara, we are the only one museum in the world which has the radio station. And let me say, it was so cheap. Let me say affordable cost, because everything was done by my staffers.
I think it's amazing. I think it's a brilliant idea, and all I can say is bravo, bravo, bravo. So now, apparently, at least from the point of view of the government, the pandemic is sufficiently under control that institutions can open up, and there's a declaration that institutions of culture can open up, and that on June 26th, which is just next week, Polin Museum will open partially with all of the safeguards of masks and social distancing and limited number of visitors. And it will on that day also open its new temporary exhibition, which was supposed to have opened on the eve of the anniversary of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, which would have been the evening of April 18th. So clearly that wasn't possible. And so the date was moved to June 26th. And what this really means when we say partially opened up is that we will not open the core exhibition. You saw from the video that the core exhibition was full of people, touch screens, a kind of situation that under these conditions we can't even begin to imagine. So the core exhibition for now will not be open. We hope to open it as soon as it's safe, but we will open the temporary exhibition. And this new temporary exhibition, I think, is very interesting and in a way very, very timely. So in Polish, we call it Tu Muranów. In English, Here is Muranów, which is about the neighborhood in which POLIN Museum is located. And in this image, you can see the monument to the ghetto heroes, and you can see what the area looked like just as these communist-era apartment blocks were going up. And the idea is to somehow communicate the layered history of this neighborhood. And that is to say, I would say from the 19th century, before the Holocaust, during the period of the Warsaw Ghetto, and then after the ghetto was destroyed by the Germans and there was a sea of rubble, the rubble was cleared, and on the remaining rubble of the ghetto, this, if you will, new Muranów rose up. And in that way, it's a way of also, I would say, honoring those who live there today and engaging them in a museum that sits at the very heart of this neighborhood. So I wonder if, you know, how did this idea arise, and what impact and what importance do you think it will have for our visitors, Zygmunt?
Well, the history of the Muranów district, the North district, or the Jewish district in Warsaw, is so interesting and so tragical. And because the museum is located in the center of this area, we decided to show the full history. Many people doesn't know that the Warsaw was before the Second World War, was the second city in the world, second to New York City in the world, with a Jewish population. More than 300,000 Jews were living in Warsaw. And it was absolutely a unique place with a Nalewki Street, which is widely known, before the now, and still is known because there is access to fantastic pictures, photos, and memories, how Nalewki looked like before the war. And right now, when the Muranów is a completely different place, the whole history is below the ground, and the new construction, new settlement is above the ground. So you can't find the traces of the former street. You need a guide, and we will be the guide. The museum will show the audience how it was looking like 70 years ago, and what we lost. I mean not only the Jewish people, but also the Warsavians, Poles, and everything, because it was absolutely unique.
Absolutely, and this is a kind of archaeology of memory, and it is a way to try to show what you can't see, and to try to really connect what's there today with what was there before, but also to think forward to the future of this neighborhood and of the place of the museum within the neighborhood. Now, of course, the way that visitors are going to experience this exhibition is quite different, as you can well imagine, from the way in which they would be normally experiencing our exhibitions with interactives, being among each other. There will be, of course, much social distancing, limited numbers, and it will be quite a different experience. And we do hope that visitors will feel safe enough to want to come. But it will not be anything like the visitor numbers, and it will be without the great vernissage where we have many hundreds of people. It will really be a very, very different situation. So now, in the time that we have left, I want us to turn to responses to the pandemic itself and some of the ways in which other museums are also contending. So, but first, a little sort of a feel for Warsaw and its empty streets during the 3-month lockdown, the gradual opening up with people going to parks, and then Corpus Christi. This was just last Thursday. with enormous numbers of people, most of them wearing masks, but not all of them. And we have no idea how these kinds of crowds are going to have an impact on basically on the health of Poles going forward. So how, basically, I want to say a few words about the pandemic itself as a topic for Jewish museums. And it's really a question also to how POLIN Museum is responding or might think about responding to it. And one of the most interesting initiatives is an initiative by the Rothschild Foundation, and it's an initiative to collect the pandemic. Essentially, they've created something called a digital Ganesa as part of their Jewish ephemera project to collect all kinds of Jewish ephemera. And I am sure this kind of ephemera exists also for Poland, and I think it's worth collecting. So in this instance, this is from Canada, my, if you will, where I was born. And it is communicating in English. And I think it's interesting that I don't know whether in English-speaking Canada, there's also such communication in Yiddish, but it basically says, it basically says, you know, wash your hands, save lives. And then it provides these instructions and images in English, so in Yiddish rather. So the idea that there's a recognition that Yiddish is a language spoken by enough people that they should be reached for their own safety and the safety of others in their own language. But now these are face masks that are being sold on Etsy, which is a basically a website for artsy, craftsy, vintage, unusual gifts. And this one relates completely to POLIN Museum and our history of Polish Jews. And I've already bought them for the collection. So I will be bringing them as soon as I can come to Poland. I'm going to come with, I have one of each. And the wonderful thing I'll show you in a moment, so this particular one says in Yiddish, Jiden red Yiddish, Jews speak Yiddish. But the image is what's so interesting. And that is, just a second. It comes from this poster, and there's one of the face masks, which is this one here. It says, "There where we live, that is our homeland," and this comes directly from an election poster. Dort wo wir leben, dort ist unser Land. The place where we are living, that is our land. Vote for list number 9, and of course this is from the Bund. And what they've done is to take this image from this interwar year election poster, and they've applied it to these pandemic face masks. So that for me is a wonderful example of what I would call a Jewish pandemic object that directly draws from the history of Polish Jews. And in this case, from the interwar years. So it's a wonderful object, and I have collected it, and I hope it will be accepted. Now, here's another one that is also very interesting. So this one is New York City, and it's from a company that makes bling things, meaning T-shirts and whatnot that have sort of sparkly silver elements. So this was presumably, they were trying to be very clever, New York City, and they were wanting to write basically stark, which means strong in Yiddish. But obviously they don't know anything about the right to left, left to right writing. And they wrote it not right to left, but left to right. And as a result, it reads, when you spell it, it reads out crotch, which clearly is not the intended message. But then there were some extraordinary, I would say, very vernacular responses in people's homes. And this one, I was going to post it to Facebook, but I didn't dare because I was afraid people would be offended. I hope they're not offended. But this was the Corona Challah, if you can imagine such a thing. But what it does is, I think it shows that in the face of a crisis, that there are responses that are very serious, like encouraging people to wash their hands in Yiddish. But there are also responses that are playful, satirical, ironic, or even you might say gallows humor, including a Seder plate for a Zoom or Passover Seder when we couldn't collect together. And this would be unique to this particular crisis. This was someone's, if you will, playful, humorous response. Also, we saw an old custom. This is my father's painting of a black wedding to get rid of a plague in the 1890s in the town of Opatów, his hometown in south central Poland. And it was a custom when there was a plague or a crisis of this kind to perform a great mitzvah, a great righteous deed. And that was to take two people who were utterly unmarriageable. They were disabled, they were poor, they were orphans, they had no dowry, they had no future, and to marry them in the cemetery and have the whole town come and to put money aside for them and to beseech the dead to intervene with God on behalf of the living. And as it turned out in this particular case, of course, the plague did subside. But in fact, there was at least one plague wedding now for the pandemic in, I think it was in Israel, which I think is quite extraordinary. So this very old custom, it actually predates the 1890s, for which I have my father's painting. And of course, this would be also very good material to be collecting. And this response to the plague includes also musical responses, not both historical, in this case, the Menschenfresser, which means basically people eater, would be one example, but there are contemporary examples. And then, of course, there are the responses, for example, in Poland, how to conduct Jewish life in Poland under the pandemic, which is not unlike the challenges that were faced by Jews all over the world, which is to say Zoom Seders, but also for Shavuos, there was a 6-hour study session, if you will, a program of events for 6 hours on the eve of Shavuos, in this case from 6 to midnight. Traditionally, it would have gone all the way through to dawn, and these were not religious studies, but rather cultural programs. And I was very happy to be able to participate in one of them, which was for Festivalt, and a Jewish arts collective in Poland that offers alternative ways of thinking about Jewish cultural production and Jewish art. In addition, in a way, the pandemic actually coincided with not only this health crisis, but also as a result of it, an economic crisis, which was then compounded by racial injustice, police violence, which then spread even to Poland. And this is actually a demonstration in Poland. We saw these demonstrations in Wrocław, Warsaw, Krakow, in solidarity with marches that were taking place not only in the United States, but also in Europe. And they're very linked also to the social justice mission of POLIN Museum, which is dedicated not only to combating anti-Semitism, but to combating intolerance of all kind. So these would be some, I would say, some examples of ways in which the pandemic has its Jewish specificity, and some of the kinds of cultural expressions of a Jewish experience and Jewish response to the pandemic, and the opportunity that some Jewish museums, libraries, archives, and organizations are actually taking advantage of to collect this material, because we don't know what future historians will be interested in, and we don't know whether we might want to actually create an exhibition. I understand that for Muranów, we're encouraging the residents of the neighborhood to bring in photographs and objects and anything that reflects how our neighbors in Muranów are living with, responding to the pandemic itself, and we're incorporating that right now. But in addition, I do believe that we're also collecting Jewish responses from across Poland to the way in which this is unfolding. I think one of the more and this will be the last example that I will provide, because I want us to be sure to open up to some questions from our visitors, and that is that I would say that the pandemic has offered us a way to deal, for example, with our global education outreach program. We have an international conference we had to reschedule that will look at the future of Jewish studies, and we decided that in the year between October 2020 and 2021, which will be the postponed date, that we would do a series of podcasts looking at how Jewish studies scholars have studied pandemics, past and present, from the point of view of the Jewish experience and Jewish responses to them. So that would be another example of how we can, in a way, leverage our current experience for thinking about it and thinking about the past, and especially thinking about new sources. And what I've just presented, pardon me, I think are some examples of some of the new sources. So basically, before we wrap up, let me just say that we learned a lot from our experience during the lockdown, and we are learning a lot from our partial opening up. And I think that the takeaway is that we can really benefit from what we've learned, and going forward, there will be some initiatives that will have a long life, like Radio Pauline. There'll be others where we're able to leverage new audiences we've reached out to, some of whom had never heard about us before, and who might be encouraged now to actually come to the museum once we're open. And also to, we're going to have to rethink how visitors are going to be experiencing exhibitions within this sort of period that is not yet new normal, and that is certainly not yet normal. So before we open it up to questions, Zygmunt, are there any comments that you'd like to make by way of closing?
I have one important question, Barbara. Will the hunger for art and for museum will be stronger than fear? This is a good question because, as you know, more than 50% of our visitors are Americans, Israelis, and citizens of the European Union countries. Will they come to Poland? Will they want to come? And are the airlines resuming connections? And once again, the first question, will the hunger of art will be stronger than fear? I'm not sure.
Well, you know, I think that, all right, what this really puts into question is to what extent, I mean, we've always premised the idea of a museum that you have to be there. If it's a memorial site, there's no substitute for being at the place where something happened. And for museums that are object-based, there is no substitute for being there in person to something called the original. But actually, in many ways, our museum has a singular advantage. And the singular advantage is that it is, first and foremost, an incredible experience at the museum, but it's also a lot more than that. And I would say that initially, for now, fear will prevail. I don't think there's any question about it, that travel is really limited, that for an older audience, this is not a time to be traveling. I think that for the moment, physical in-person presence at the museum is going to be limited. What that means is that everything we learned from being fully closed, we have to leverage, strengthen, be even more, I would say, creative in reaching our audience where they actually are, and creating the appetite and creating the enthusiasm for returning when it is safe to do so. So I would say that there are two things that I would say are the takeaway, or maybe three things. The first thing is that POLIN Museum must be resilient, that we have to be resilient now in the current situation, but we have to also position ourselves to be ready for when the time comes to be able to open fully, throw open our doors and to welcome people fully. But we have to, in a sense, be prepared for when that moment comes. But in the meantime, we have to stay very, very closely in touch with our ever broadening, widening audience, with better and better communication and content that we can bring to them, and where we continue to engage them with what we're really about, whether they're physically in our building or whether we are virtually in their homes. And I think that our resilience in managing under these conditions and in leveraging the online opportunities, which is more than simply moving our programs online. It's also about creating completely new way of thinking about what we do online, which is something we never had to do before because we could really depend on people being in the building. But now but that's why I think Radio Pauline is so brilliant. That is not a substitute for something. That is original. That is born digital. That is, I mean, that is a really great example. So that for me is the challenge. They will eventually come back. Absolutely, they will come back. But what I want is that there should be a pent up, that is, fear will keep them away for now. But our resilience and their resilience will be critical. And it's about building up a kind of pent up appetite, enthusiasm, and desire to return in full force once we're able to open, and to be able to open fully, and to open fully and safely. And that, I think, is really the challenge, not only for us, but I think for all museums. That is the challenge. And relevance, that we are speaking to issues that people care about, that are important to them, that we are a force in the contemporary world. That is going to be, I think, a key to why people will want to come to us, and why they'll want to stay in touch with us online even when they can't. And that, I think, is that resilience is key, is, if you will, relevance is a key to our resilience. And that is something that's another topic for perhaps another conversation, but that's where I would go. And I think your question is very, very well taken. So maybe with that, we have a few minutes, maybe we'll open up to some whatever questions we can take.
Absolutely. So first of all, Barbara and Zygmunt, thank you. A lot of the people have already communicated their great joy and having had the opportunity to hear you both. You've already answered some of the questions, but we will, as I said, we will share them with you. I think your final comments on resilience really resound with all of us. And some of the questions, and let me just share two of them with you. Many people are interested in Radio Pauline and how far it broadcasts, and what languages it's broadcasting, because people are really excited. As Barbara, you pointed out, this is from the, pardon me, old days, but we're all listening to all sorts of things. And so it stands for Radio Pauline, reaching beyond the borders of Poland, are out there.
Yeah, you can get it. I think basically what we're going to do is, in the follow-up email that comes out from the Toby Heritage, there will be links, and there'll be a link to Radio Pauline and how you can find it. Excellent,
excellent. And one of the other questions is, and I think Barbara and Zygmunt, you already addressed it, but you know, as you said, going forward, what do you take with you? What do you focus on, and how do you continue to grow your audience and people who are interested in what you do? What are your feelings in terms of opening when first of all, Poland is opening. The European borders are now open. So what is the plan for this sort of stages of re-welcoming the world? And I agree that fear stands in the way, well-founded perhaps. How does that look going forward?
So Zygmunt, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I will start. Honestly, I have only one huge problem. Of course, pandemic is also a problem, but it's a huge financial losses which we face from the day of the closing of the museum. So most of my time, working time, I spent on the discussion, negotiation with my partners and possible partners, how to find a new financing for a museum, because until now the Ministry of Culture do not establish a special fund to support the cultural institution, including the museum, which are truly bleeding. So I think that this is my first task, to find a financial support. We are ready to open the core exhibition tomorrow. It's only a technical problem. We didn't decide to do it because of the fear. First of all, I said that I have to be 100% sure that all the regime in the museum works, and the museum is of the audience in 2019. So they are losing more money. And I think that it was not a good decision, maybe in some way a little bit political, but because POLIN Museum is not and never been political, so I do not decide to open it until I'm 100% sure that this is safe.
Yeah, I think actually the pandemic is not over. And the more that things open up, the more opportunity there is for the virus to resurge. And we know it from previous epidemics, and we know it already from this epidemic in other parts of the world, that there will be resurgence. That short of New Zealand, which even in New Zealand, they are worried about two contagious people who infected 300 more when they thought they had 0, that it's not over. And so I think that it's a very uncertain time, and that requires, I think, great, I would call it nimbleness, to be very, very nimble in responding. And I think the cautiousness, I think that Zygmunt's approach is the right one, which is to be cautious, to place safety at the forefront, and to confront the single biggest threat to the viability of the institution, which is the loss of earned income. Earned income is absolutely, it's 30% of the museum's budget. And that earned income, even, you can't, right now, charging for what we offer online is not really, I don't think it's realistic. And not only that, but in this atmosphere, there has been a great spirit of generosity where even newspapers are offering content free of charge, particularly as it relates to the pandemic. So I think that trying to monetize our online presence, I don't see that as a solution. I don't know what the solution is, but I do think that that is a tremendous, that is addressing the financial situation is, I think, probably the single biggest challenge. Zygmunt?
Well, I have the same point of view as you in monetizing the online presence. For me, the most important task is to reach a new audience in a remote area of Poland. People who will never come to the museum because they do not have enough funds. They face the transport problems, and they are teachers, high school students. And right now, when we decide to organize a workshop and lesson dedicated to this group, it's an enormous rise of high school students who attend our workshops. So this is fantastic. And probably if we establish even a small, payment for participating in the audience lecture, probably the number of people attending will drop down.
So
yes, I couldn't agree more. I do think that our online outreach is our big opportunity, and this is the time to really capitalize on it.
So none of us want to stop. We've got a lot of different people in the audience, a few questions that we'll share with you and begin to address, some that we can address to both of you in terms of future programming. It's been an honor and a privilege, Barbara and Zygmunt, to have you with us. We are staunch partners and really appreciate the fact that you've been able to share with us the whole concept of resilience and how that translates not into only what we've been doing now, but what we all need to do, and you as POLIN Museum and other institutions need to do going forward as we negotiate, as Barbara pointed out, the new realities that we find ourselves in. So I want to thank you both for giving your time and your expertise. There is a saying in Pirkei Avot, the saying of our, it says fathers, but I'm going to be our ancestors, our parents, our fathers and mothers, who is wise? And the answer is the wise one is one who learns from everyone. And so I would like to thank you on behalf of TGHT Talks for sharing your wisdom. We are now wiser, we are thinking more broadly, and we're all looking forward to learning more from both of you, from all of the POLIN Museum options, both online, and all of us are waiting for all of you in the audience who are far away to come and visit us in Poland. So without any further comment, I'd like to thank everyone and say good night or good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are, and to welcome you and suggest that you take a look at what's coming up next. Our webinar, Zoom webinar, will be with Antoni Polański and Marcin Wojcinski. And in between, if you have questions that you would like us to share with any of our speakers, with Barbara or Zygmunt, it will be our pleasure to share it with them. Dobranoc.
Thank you.
Lila.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.